the Year-End Bulletina, documentary horror narrative. Opening. At exactly 11:59:12 p.m. on December 31st, 2024, a broadcast appeared on a screen that should have been off. The screen belonged to Dr. Helena Vance, a 43-year-old archival researcher who had spent the past 18 months investigating a phenomenon that no institution would acknowledge, no database would confirm, and no witness could prove, except through memories that grew more vivid even as the evidence grew more absent. She was alone in her apartment in Boston, the city quiet beneath a layer of fresh snow, the countdown to midnight playing on a television she had deliberately unplugged 3 hours earlier. She had taken the additional precaution of removing the batteries from her remote, disconnecting her router, and placing her phone in a Faraday bag that she had purchased specifically for this night. None of it mattered. At 11:59:12, the screen illuminated, not with the countdown she had been avoiding, not with the celebration she had refused to watch, with a newsroom, clean, calm, empty of anything except a desk, an anchor, and a graphic in the corner that said Oracle News. Year-End Edition. Helena stood frozen in the blue light of a broadcast that should have been impossible, watching an anchor who never blinked deliver announcements about a year that had not yet begun. Announcements that were not predictions, not prophecies, not guesses about what might happen. They were filings, administrative confirmations of events that had already been approved, already been scheduled, already been entered into a ledger that existed somewhere beyond the reach of human understanding. And at the bottom of the screen, a ticker crawled with words that Helena would spend the next 12 months trying to forget. This is not a prediction. This is a filing. The year 2025 has been finalized. She watched for 47 seconds before the broadcast ended and her screen returned to darkness. 47 seconds that would change everything she thought she knew about time, about archives, about the nature of recorded reality. 47 seconds that would lead her to discover that she was not the first person to witness the year-end bulletin, and that she would not be the last. Section 1. The pattern emerged. Helena Vance had not always believed in impossible broadcasts. For 20 years, she had worked as a research analyst at the Peabody Institute for Media Preservation, a small but respected organization dedicated to cataloging and preserving broadcast media, the television programs, radio transmissions, and emergency alerts that documented how humanity communicated with itself across the decades. Her job was to find patterns, to identify connections between broadcasts that seemed unrelated, to build archives that would allow future researchers to understand what the present had considered important enough to transmit through the airwaves. She was good at her job. She had a talent for seeing relationships that others missed, for recognizing the subtle signatures that linked broadcasts across time and space, for understanding that the history of media was not a collection of isolated events, but a continuous conversation that humanity had been having with itself since the first radio signal crackled through the static. But the year-end bulletin was different. The year-end bulletin was a pattern that should not have existed. Helena first encountered it in March of 2024, when a man named Robert Chen sent her an email that she almost deleted as spam. The subject line read, "You study broadcasts. I saw one that doesn't exist." The body of the email was brief. "I am a retired electrical engineer living in Portland, Oregon. On New Year's Eve, 2023, at exactly 11:59:12 p.m., my television showed a broadcast that was not on any channel. It lasted 47 seconds. It showed a newsroom with an anchor who announced events for 2024. Every event has happened exactly as announced. I have tried to find evidence of this broadcast. There is none. I have tried to tell people what I saw. They do not believe me. I have tried to forget. I cannot. I found your name in an article about unusual broadcast phenomena. You are the only person I can think of who might understand. Please respond." Robert Chen. Helena received dozens of emails like this every month. Claims of mysterious broadcasts, hidden messages, signals from sources that could not be identified. Most of them were the products of pattern-seeking minds that had found patterns where none existed. But something about Robert Chen's email was different. Something about the specificity, 11:59:12, 47 seconds, a newsroom with an anchor, felt less like fantasy and more like memory. She responded. She asked for details, and Robert Chen provided them. Testimony of Robert Chen, Portland, Oregon, witnessed December 31st, 2023. I was alone on New Year's Eve. My wife passed away in 2019, and I haven't felt much like celebrating since then. I keep the television on for company, not really watching, just having noise in the background so the house doesn't feel so empty. At 11:59, I was in the kitchen making tea. The countdown was on the television in the living room. I could hear it. The crowd noise, the anticipation, the announcer's voice building toward midnight, and then the sound changed, not gradually, not with any transition, just changed. The crowd noise stopped. The announcer's voice stopped. Everything stopped except this new voice, this calm voice that didn't sound like it was coming from a celebration. I walked back into the living room. The screen showed a newsroom. Not any newsroom I recognized. Clean, minimal, with a desk and a backdrop that looked almost too simple, like a set that had been designed to convey information without distraction. An anchor sat behind the desk. Male, middle-aged, face that was ordinary enough to forget, but eyes that made you feel like he was looking at you specifically, through the camera, through the screen, into whatever room you were sitting in. A graphic in the corner said Oracle News, Year-End Edition. A ticker at the bottom said, "This is not a prediction. This is a filing." And the anchor began to speak. He announced events for 2024. Not vaguely, specifically. He talked about a bridge collapse in Baltimore that would occur in March. He talked about an assassination attempt that would happen in the summer. He talked about a hurricane that would deviate from predicted paths in ways that would catch emergency services off guard. Each announcement was delivered in the same tone, calm, factual, administrative, like he was reading a schedule that had already been approved rather than making predictions about events that hadn't happened yet. At the bottom of the screen, beneath the ticker, there was a timestamp, 11:59:12. It didn't change. For the entire 47 seconds of the broadcast, the timestamp stayed frozen at 11:59:12. Then the broadcast ended. The countdown returned. The clock struck midnight. The crowd on the television cheered, and I stood in my living room, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold, understanding that I had just seen something that I was not supposed to see. I wrote down everything I remembered. The bridge in Baltimore, the assassination attempt, the hurricane. I kept the notes in a drawer and waited to see if any of it would come true. In March, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. In July, there was an assassination attempt at a campaign rally. In October, a hurricane deviated from predictions and caused damage that emergency services weren't prepared for. Everything the anchor announced happened, not approximately, not vaguely, exactly. I tried to find evidence of the broadcast. I searched online. I contacted television stations. I checked every archive I could access. Nothing. The broadcast left no trace, except in my memory and now in yours. Helena verified Robert Chen's claims as thoroughly as she could. The events he described had occurred. The timestamps he provided aligned with documented records. The details he remembered matched news coverage from the relevant dates. But there was no evidence of the broadcast itself. No recordings, no logs, no indication that any signal had interrupted the New Year's Eve programming at 11:59:12 p.m. on December 31st, 2023. Helena began searching for other witnesses. She posted carefully worded queries on forums dedicated to broadcast anomalies. She reached out to colleagues at other archives. She contacted researchers who studied unexplained phenomena. And slowly, over the following months, the responses began to arrive. Sections 2, The Witnesses. By October of 2024, Helena had collected testimonies from 17 people who claimed to have witnessed the year-end bulletin. They came from different countries. They spoke different languages. They had different backgrounds, different professions, different reasons for being awake at 11:59 p.m. on New Year's Eve. But their stories shared features that could not be explained by coincidence or coordination. They all described the same newsroom. They all described the same anchor. They all described the same timestamp, 11:59:12, frozen at the bottom of the screen. They all described broadcasts that lasted exactly 47 seconds. and they all described prophecies that had come true. Testimony of Yuki Tanaka, Tokyo Japanist, December 31st, 2022. I was working late at the hospital, emergency room nurse. New Year's Eve is always busy. Accidents, alcohol poisoning, the usual chaos of people celebrating too hard. At 11:59, I stepped into the break room to get coffee. There was a small television on the wall, tuned to the NHK countdown. I wasn't really watching, just glancing at it while the coffee machine worked. The screen changed. A newsroom appeared, Western style, but somehow familiar, like I had seen it before, even though I knew I hadn't. An anchor sat behind a desk, speaking in Japanese that was too formal, too precise, like it had been written rather than spoken naturally. He announced events for 2023, a train derailment in the spring, a corruption scandal in the summer, an earthquake that would be smaller than expected but would reveal problems with early warning systems. Each announcement was followed by a ticker line. This has been filed. The schedule is final. I watched for maybe 30 seconds before a colleague called me back to the emergency room. When I returned to the break room an hour later, the television was showing normal programming, and no one else mentioned seeing anything unusual. I thought I had hallucinated. Sleep deprivation, stress, the particular exhaustion of working emergency medicine on a holiday. But then the train derailed, and the corruption scandal broke, and the earthquake happened. Exactly as announced. I started paying attention to the news differently after that. Started noticing how many events matched what the anchor had said. Started understanding that what I had seen was not a hallucination, but a preview, a schedule of events that had already been approved. I tried to find others who had seen the broadcast. I found nothing. Until your email arrived. Now I know I am not alone. Now I know the broadcast is real. Now I am terrified of what that means. Testimony of Marcus Oyelaran, Lagos, Nigeria, witnessed December 31st, 2021. I was at a party, one of those New Year's Eve gatherings where everyone is watching multiple screens, television, phones, tablets, all showing different countdowns from different time zones, everyone trying to be part of the global celebration. At 11:59, something happened to all the screens simultaneously. Not just one television, all of them. Every device in the room switched to the same image at the same moment. A newsroom, an anchor, a ticker that said year-end bulletin. The room went quiet. Everyone was staring at the screens, confused, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. The anchor spoke in English, not Nigerian English, not American English, something more neutral, like a voice that had been designed to be understood by everyone, regardless of where they came from. He announced events for 2022, a conflict in Eastern Europe that would begin in late February, an energy crisis that would spread across continents, inflation that would accelerate beyond the predictions of economists. The announcements lasted less than a minute. Then the screens returned to their normal programming, and everyone at the party looked at each other like we had just shared a dream. Did you see that? What was that? Was that some kind of hack? We talked about it for maybe 10 minutes. Then the champagne was poured, and the countdown resumed, and by the time the clock struck midnight, people had already started forgetting. But I remembered. I remembered because the conflict in Eastern Europe began in late February, exactly as the anchor had said. I remembered because the energy crisis spread exactly as described. I remembered because inflation accelerated exactly as announced. The broadcast was not a hack. It was not a prank. It was a filing, a notification that the year had been approved and the schedule was final. I have watched every New Year's Eve since then, hoping to see it again. I have seen nothing, but I know it is still happening. I know because the world keeps following the schedule. Whether we see the broadcast or not, the year has already been filed. Testimony of Alina Kowalski, Warsaw, Poland, witnessed December 31st, 2020. I was alone. The pandemic, the lockdowns, the particular isolation of a New Year's Eve when gathering was forbidden and celebration felt obscene. I had a small television in my bedroom. I turned it on at 11:55, not because I wanted to celebrate, but because the silence of my apartment had become unbearable. I needed voices, even if they were only coming from a screen. At 11:59:12, the broadcast changed. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock. I was counting down the final minute of year that had been catastrophic, waiting for it to end, hoping that the next year would be better. The clock reached 11:59:12 and stopped, not the broadcast, the clock on the screen. The seconds stopped advancing. The image froze for just a moment, and then it changed to a newsroom I had never seen before. The anchor appeared. He spoke in Polish. Perfect Polish, but cold, like a translator who knew the words but not the warmth. He announced events for 2021. Vaccine distribution would be slower than promised. Economic recovery would be uneven. A ship would block a canal and disrupt global supply chains in ways that would still be felt months later. Each announcement was delivered without emotion. Each one was followed by the same ticker. The filing is complete. I watched for 47 seconds. I know because I counted them, because counting was the only way I could process what I was seeing. And then the broadcast ended, and the clock resumed, and midnight arrived as if nothing had happened. I spent the next year watching the news differently, watching for the events the anchor had described, finding them, every single one. The vaccines were delayed. The recovery was uneven. The ship blocked the canal. Everything happened exactly as filed. I tried to tell people, my family, my friends, my therapist. They thought the pandemic had affected my mental health. They thought I was seeing patterns that weren't there. They didn't understand that I wasn't seeing patterns. I was reading a schedule that had been finalized before the year began. A schedule that noon could change because it had already been approved. I don't know who approves these things. I don't know where the schedule comes from. I only know that it exists, and that watching the broadcast doesn't change anything. The year was already filed before I saw announcement. Seeing it just meant I knew what was coming, and knowing didn't help. Section 3. The archive deepened. Helena compiled the testimonies. She cross-referenced the dates. She verified the events. And she began to notice patterns within patterns, structures that suggested the year-end bulletin was not a random phenomenon, but a systematic one, operating according to rules that she was only beginning to understand. The broadcasts always occurred at exactly 11:59:12 p.m. They always lasted exactly 47 seconds. They always featured the same anchor, the same newsroom, the same calm administrative tone. And they always included a moment, usually around the 30-second mark, when the image flickered and something appeared behind the anchor that was not part of the newsroom set. Different witnesses described this moment differently. Robert Chen saw faces, a row of people standing silently watching. Yuki Tanaka saw numbers, columns of figures that seemed to extend beyond the edges of the screen. Marcus Eularn saw a book, a massive ledger open to pages covered in handwriting. Elena Kowalski saw nothing, a void, an absence, a blank space where something should have been but wasn't. Helena documented these variations. She noted that the witnesses who saw the ledger had all witnessed broadcasts from years ending in even numbers. She noted that the witnesses who saw faces had all been alone when they watched. She noted that the witness who saw nothing had been in quarantine, isolated from physical contact with other human beings. The pattern suggested meaning, but the meaning remained opaque. Helena continued her research, and in November of 2024, she received a document that changed everything. Archive excerpt, recovered document, source, anonymous submission to Peabody Institute, November 2024. Description, photocopy of handwritten pages, origin unknown. What follows is a transcription of the recovered document. The original was written in English with occasional annotations in a script that could not be identified. The handwriting is precise and consistent, suggesting a single author working over an extended period. The paper shows signs of age but cannot be reliably dated. The ledger of years, index fragment, classification system for year-end bulletin recipients. Category A, observers, individuals who witness the broadcast without seeking it. Passive recipients, low priority for monitoring. Retention rate of memory, 73% after 1 year, declining to 12% after 5 years. No intervention required. Category B, analysts, individuals who witness the broadcast and subsequently attempt to document or verify it. Medium priority for monitoring. Tendency to contact other witnesses. Potential for pattern recognition. Retention rate of memory, 94% after 1 year, stable. May require observation. Category C, archivists, individuals who collect and preserve witness testimonies. High priority for monitoring. Demonstrate capacity for synthesis and connection. Potential threat to filing integrity. Retention rate of memory, 100%. Intervention may be necessary. Category D, witnesses. Individuals whose testimonies contribute to the record. Variable priority. Serve as documentation of broadcast occurrence. May be referenced in future filings. Retention determined by archival necessity. Category E, threats. Individuals who attempt to disrupt, prevent, or alter the filing process. Maximum priority. Immediate intervention required. Retention of memory, terminated upon classification, year-end bulletin. Structural notes. The broadcast occurs at 11:59:12 p.m. local time in each time zone. The 47-second duration corresponds to the number of weeks in the coming year that have been fully scheduled at the time of filing. The remaining 5 weeks, 52 minus 47, are subject to adjustment based on observation patterns detected during the broadcast. The anchor is not a person. The anchor is a function. The newsroom is not a location. The newsroom is an interface. The ticker does not predict. The ticker confirms. The filing is not a warning. The filing is a notification. The events announced are not possibilities. They are commitments. The schedule is not a forecast. The schedule is a contract. Additional note, written margin. She is getting close. Classification pending. Monitor through year-end. Helena read the document 3 times. The first time, she felt confusion. The second time, she felt fear. The third time, she felt the specific horror of recognition, the understanding that she was not investigating the year-end bulletin from a position of safety. She was being investigated by it. The document described her. Category C, archivists. Individuals who collect and preserve witness testimonies. High priority for monitoring. Potential threat to filing integrity. Intervention may be necessary. Helena looked at the date on the postmark of the envelope that had contained the document, November 12, 2024. The 12th, 11:59, 47 seconds. The numbers kept appearing. The pattern kept expanding. And Helena understood that she had crossed a threshold without realizing it, had moved from observer to analyst to archivist, each classification bringing her closer to something that did not want to be understood. She continued anyway, because stopping would not erase what she had learned, and because December 31st was approaching, and because she needed to see for herself. Section 4. The Ledger of Years. In the weeks before New Year's Eve, Helena intensified her research. She reached out to her witnesses. She asked them to provide additional details, anything they had remembered since their initial testimonies, anything that might help her understand what the year-end bulletin actually was. The responses revealed new layers of the phenomenon. Supplementary testimony. Robert Chen. You asked about what I saw behind the anchor. I said I saw faces. That's true, but I didn't describe them fully because I wasn't sure how to explain what I mean. The faces weren't looking at the camera. They weren't looking at the anchor. They were looking at me. Not in a threatening way. Not in a way that suggested they wanted anything from me. In a way that suggested they were recording me, documenting my presence, adding me to whatever ledger they were keeping. I've thought about this a lot over the past year. I've tried to understand what it means to be recorded by something you're watching. The only explanation I can come up with is this. The broadcast isn't just announcing the future, it's creating an audience for the announcement, and the audience becomes part of the record. We're not just watching the filing, we're being filed ourselves. Supplementary testimony. Yuki Tanaka, you asked about the numbers I saw. They weren't random. They had a structure. Columns and rows, dates and figures. Like a spreadsheet, but old, like something that had been kept manually before computers existed. I only saw it for a fraction of a second. 1 frame, maybe less. But I remember feeling like I was looking at an accounting system. Like the events being announced weren't just scheduled. They were budgeted, resources allocated, outcomes assigned, costs calculated. The earthquake I mentioned, the one that was smaller than expected, I remember seeing a number next to it, a figure that might have been a casualty count. The actual casualty count when the earthquake happened matched what I had seen. Exactly. I don't know how to explain what that means, but I know what it felt like. It felt like the future isn't uncertain. It's just unreleased. Supplementary testimony. Marcus Euleron, you asked about the ledger. I saw pages, many pages, handwritten entries that seemed to extend beyond what the screen could show. But there was something else I didn't mention before. At the top of the visible page, there was a header. It said, Year-End Bulletin, Filing 2022. And beneath it, a subtitle, Approved for Release, Release. That word has stayed with me. Not predicted, not scheduled, released. Like the future is a document that gets approved and then distributed, and the broadcast is just the distribution mechanism. We're not witnessing predictions, we're receiving official notifications. The future has been approved, and we're just being informed. Supplementary testimony. Elena Kowalski. You asked about the void. I saw nothing behind the anchor, a blank space, an absence. But I've been thinking about it, and I realized something. The void wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything that wasn't being shown, full of events that were scheduled but not announced, full of the parts of the year that we weren't supposed to know about. The broadcast only reveals some of what has been filed. The rest stays in the void, hidden, unreleased, waiting. I think the void is where the really terrible things are kept, the events that would cause panic if people knew they were coming, the filings that are too dangerous to announce. We only see part of the schedule. The void contains everything else, and the void is much larger than what we're shown. The year-end approaches. December arrived. Helena made preparations. She documented everything she had learned in multiple formats: written notes, audio recordings, files stored in cloud services, and physical drives distributed across multiple locations. She arranged for the archive to be released if anything happened to her, a dead man's switch that would ensure her research survived even if she did not. She contacted her witnesses and asked them to be available on New Year's Eve to report anything they saw, to confirm whether the broadcast appeared again. And she waited. The days passed slowly. The holiday season unfolded around her with its usual rituals of celebration and reflection, of endings and beginnings, of the collective human need to mark the passage of time with significance. Helena participated in none of it. She worked, she organized, she prepared. And on December 31st, 2024, at 11:30 p.m., she sat alone in her apartment in Boston, surrounded by recording equipment, with every device she owned powered on and connected to documentation systems that would capture anything that appeared on any screen. She had everything she could to be ready. She had taken every precaution she could imagine. But she had also made one decision that she knew was dangerous. She was going to watch, not look away, not try to avoid the broadcast. Watch deliberately. Watch with full attention. Watch to see what the year-end bulletin would announce for 2025, and watch to see if the broadcast would notice that she was watching. The screens changed. All of them. The television, the laptop, the tablet, the phone. Every device in her apartment synchronized to a single broadcast, a newsroom that had no origin point, an anchor that had no identity, a ticker that had no source. Oracle News, year-end edition. The anchor looked at the camera, at Helena, and began to speak. Recovered transcript, year-end bulletin 2025. Source audio recording recovered from Helena Vance's documentation equipment, duration 47 seconds. Timestamp 11:15 p.m. EST, December 31st, 2024. Good evening, this is Oracle News year-end edition. The year 2025 has been filed. What follows is an administrative summary of scheduled events. This is not a prediction. This is a notification. Ticker, filing 2025. In February, a weather system will develop in the North Atlantic that does not match historical patterns. Emergency services will be unprepared. The event has been classified as a correction. In April, a major financial institution will experience a liquidity event that will not be reflected in public markets for 17 days. The delay is intentional. The event has been classified as an adjustment. In June, an artificial intelligence system will produce outputs that its creators cannot explain. The system will be discontinued. The outputs will not be disclosed. The event has been classified as a containment. In August, a pathogen will be identified in 3 countries simultaneously. The identification will be coordinated. The pathogen will not spread beyond initial cases. The event has been classified as a demonstration. Ticker, Biological. In September, a conflict will begin that does not align with publicly known alliances. The conflict will end in 11 days. The resolution will not be explained. The event has been classified as a realignment. In October, a satellite system will fail. The failure will affect navigation and communication in ways that will not be immediately visible. The event has been classified as a test. Ticker category infrastructure. In November, a public figure will make a statement that contradicts documented evidence. The contradiction will not be resolved. Memory of the original evidence will become contested. The event has been classified as a fracture. Throughout the year, individuals will disappear from records without disappearing from existence. The discrepancy will not be investigated. The event has been classified as a filing error, intentional, archival. And in December, this broadcast will not appear again. Not because the filings will stop, because the filings will no longer require announcement. The schedule will continue, the events will proceed, but the notifications will cease. 2026, filing. This is not an ending. Thank you for watching. Your attention has been recorded. Kerr's expression shifts for one frame, looking directly at the viewer. A ledger open with names visible. The last name on the page is legible. The name is Vance Helena. Status C. Helena sat in the silence that followed. The recording equipment had captured everything. The transcript was complete. The evidence was documented. But the final frame, the frame that had shown her name in the ledger, played over and over in her mind, a confirmation of what she had suspected but had not wanted to believe. She was not investigating the year-end bulletin. She was part of it. Her attention had been recorded. Her observation had been filed. She had become a participant in a system she had thought she was studying from the outside, and the system had known, had always known, had been watching her watch it. Section 6. The final testimony. In the hours after the broadcast, Helena contacted her witnesses. She asked them to report what they had seen. The responses arrived slowly. Testimony. January 1st, 2025. I watched. The broadcast appeared at 11:59:12, exactly as it did 2 years ago. The announcements were different, new events for the new year, but the format was the same. 47 seconds. The anchor, the ticker, and behind the anchor, the faces I had seen before. But this time, there were more of them, many more, and one of the faces looked familiar. I couldn't place it at first, just a woman, middle-aged, standing in the row with the others. Then I realized I had seen her photograph in your email signature. Dr. Vance, I think I saw you in the broadcast, behind the anchor, among the observers being observed. Testimony. Yuki Tanaka, January 1st, 2025. The broadcast appeared on the television in the break room. No one else was there, just me, like before. The announcements were about 2025, events I will now watch for throughout the year. But at the end, something different happened. The anchor said the broadcasts would stop next year. No more announcements. The filings would continue, but silently. And then, in the last frame, I saw the numbers again. The spreadsheet, the accounting. But this time, there was a new column. It was labeled, Attention Confirmed. And beneath it, a list of names. I couldn't read most of them, but I could read the last one. It was yours, Dr. Vance. I don't know what this means, but I think the broadcast knows you're watching. I think the broadcast has always known. Testimony. Marcus Euleron, January 1st, 2025. I saw the ledger again, the pages, the entries, the handwriting. But this year the ledger was different. It wasn't just open, it was being written in. As I watched, new entries appeared on the page. Names, dates, classifications, and one entry was highlighted, circled in red, as if it required special attention. The entry said, Vance Helena, archivist, filing participation confirmed, threshold crossed. Dr. Vance, I don't know how to interpret this, but I think something happened when you watched the broadcast. I think your watching completed something. I think you're part of the filing now. Not just a witness, a participant. Testimony. Alina Kowalski, January 1st, 2025. I saw the void, larger this time, filling more of the screen behind the anchor. And in the void, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Movement. Not figures, not shapes, just movement. Like something vast was shifting in the darkness. Like something that had been waiting was beginning to stir. And at the very edge of the void, just before the broadcast ended, I saw a face, just one face. A woman's face. Looking out from the void, looking at me. And I knew somehow that the face was looking at everyone who was watching. That the face was seeing all of us at once. That the face was recording our attention the way we thought we were recording the broadcast. Dr. Vance, I think the broadcast isn't just filing the future. I think it's filing the watchers. I think we become part of the record when we pay attention. And I think you paid more attention than anyone. I think you're in the ledger now. Permanently. Section 7. The implication. Helena spent the first week of January reviewing the testimonies. She compared them to her own recording. She analyzed the transcript of the broadcast she had witnessed, and she began to understand what the year-end bulletin actually was. It was not a prediction system. It was not a warning mechanism. It was an archive. An archive that recorded not just events, but observers. An archive that grew with each viewing. An archive that incorporated the attention of its witnesses into its own structure. The broadcasts were not designed to inform. They were designed to collect, to gather observers, to file their attention alongside the events they observed. Helena understood now why the witnesses who saw faces always saw more faces each year. The faces were previous witnesses, people who had watched the broadcast in years past. People whose attention had been recorded and incorporated into the system. People who were now part of the ledger, standing behind the anchor, observing the observers who would join them. And Helena understood, with the specific horror of certainty, that she was about to become one of them. Her name was in the ledger. Her category had been assigned. Her status had been updated. And when the next New Year's Eve arrived, if there was a next broadcast, if the announcement about silent filings hadn't been entirely accurate, she would not be watching from the outside. She would be standing with the others, behind the anchor, in the space between the newsroom and the void, watching the next generation of witnesses become part of the record forever. Section 8. The final filing. Helena Vance did not stop researching. In the months that followed, she continued to collect testimonies. She continued to analyze patterns. She continued to document everything she learned about the year-end bulletin. But she did so with a new awareness, the awareness that her research was not separate from its subject, that her attention was not neutral, that every observation she made was being observed in return. She published her findings in June of 2025 under a pseudonym on an archive that specialized in unexplained phenomena. The document was titled The Year-End Bulletin, a preliminary analysis of prophetic broadcast phenomena. It contained everything she had learned, the testimonies, the transcripts, the patterns, the classifications, the implications, and a warning. Archive excerpt. Final document. Source: published research, June 2025. Author anonymous, later identified as Dr. Helena Vance. A note to readers. If you have reached this point in the document, you have done what I did. You have paid attention. You have followed the pattern. You have observed the phenomenon I have been describing. And in doing so, you have participated in it. The year-end bulletin is not a passive system. It does not simply announce events. It collects observers. It records attention. It files those who watch alongside the events they witness. By reading this document, you have demonstrated the kind of attention that the bulletin seeks. You have shown that you are capable of sustained observation, of pattern recognition, of the curiosity that leads people to pursue phenomena that others dismiss. This makes you a potential participant. This means your attention has likely been noted. This means you may receive the broadcast. I do not know when the broadcasts will resume. The 2024 bulletin announced that 2026 would be a silent filing. Events would proceed without announcement. But I do not believe the system has stopped. I believe the system has simply changed its method of collection. Instead of broadcasting to random devices, it is now distributing through documents like this one. Instead of appearing on screens, it is appearing in archives. Instead of announcing, it is attracting. And every person who reads this document, who follows the pattern, who pays attention, who demonstrates the qualities that the bulletin values, becomes a potential addition to the ledger. This is not a warning. A warning would imply that you could do something to avoid what is coming. You cannot. Your attention has already been recorded. Your observation has already been filed. Your participation has already been confirmed. This document is not a warning. It is a notification. Welcome to the archive. Your filing has begun. Helena Vance was last seen on December 30th, 2025. She left her apartment in the evening, telling a neighbor she was going out to watch the stars. She did not return. Her apartment was found empty on January 2nd, 2026. Her research was intact. Her recording equipment was intact. Her files were intact. But she was gone, not missing exactly. Her name still appeared in public records. Her identity still existed in official databases, but no one could find her. No one could remember exactly when they had last seen her. No one could verify that she had ever been there at all. The archive continued to exist. The testimonies continued to circulate. The document you are reading continued to be shared. And somewhere, in a newsroom that does not exist, in a broadcast that cannot be traced, in a ledger that grows larger with each passing year, Helena Vance stands behind an anchor who never blinks, watching, recording, filing the attention of those who follow the pattern she mapped. Epilogue. The clock. It is 11:58 p.m. on December 31st, 2025. You have been reading this document for some time now, long enough for your attention to be noted, long enough for your observation to be recorded, long enough for your filing to be initiated. In 72 seconds, it will be 11:59:12 p.m. In 72 seconds, the timestamp that has appeared in every testimony, every transcript, every description of the year-end bulletin will arrive in your time zone. You may choose to close this document. You may choose to turn off your device. You may choose to look away. It will not matter. The filing does not require your presence. The filing only requires your attention, and you have already given that. The broadcast announced that 2026 would be a silent filing. No announcements, no warnings, no notifications. The events will proceed without being named. The schedule will execute without being revealed. The future will arrive without anyone being told what it contains, except those who are already in the archive, except those who have already been filed, except those whose attention has already been recorded. You are one of them now. Welcome to the ledger. Your classification is being determined. Your status is being assigned. Your place among the observers is being prepared. When the clock reaches 11:50:12, you may see nothing, or you may see everything. The broadcast may appear, or the broadcast may have already appeared. In this document, in these words, in the attention you have been paying all along. This is not a prediction. This is a filing. Your year has been approved. Your schedule has been finalized. Your future has been released. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your attention. It has been recorded. It will be preserved. It will be filed alongside all the others who came before you, the witnesses, the analysts, the archivists, the observers who thought they were studying the phenomenon and discovered too late that they were participating in it. The year-end bulletin does not end. It expands, one reader at a time, one observer at a time, one filing at a time, until everyone who has ever paid attention is part of the archive, until the ledger contains every name, until the future is not just released but permanent, a schedule that cannot be changed because everyone who might change it has been incorporated into the system that created it. This is not a warning. Warnings are for people who can still avoid what is coming. You cannot. This is a notification. The filing is complete. The year has been approved. The broadcast has ended. The silence has begun. And in the silence, somewhere behind an anchor who never blinks, a new face has joined the row, watching, waiting, recording the attention of those who will follow. Check the time. The year is beginning. Your filing has already started. Addendum. The year of silence. The year 2026 began without announcement. No broadcast appeared at 11:59:12 p.m. on December 31st, 2025. No anchor spoke. No ticker crawled across the bottom of any screen. The silence the final bulletin had promised arrived exactly as described, complete, total, and somehow more terrifying than any announcement could have been. But the silence was not empty. The silence was full of events that proceeded without notification. The silence was heavy with a schedule that executed without acknowledgement. The silence was pregnant with futures that arrived unmarked, unannounced, and undeniable. Those who had witnessed previous broadcasts, those whose attention had been recorded, whose names had been filed, whose participation had been confirmed, experienced the silence differently than those who had never seen the year-end bulletin. They experienced it as presence, as weight, as the particular awareness of standing in a room where something vast is breathing just beyond the edge of perception. Testimony of Robert Chen, March 2026, collected by Automated Archive System. The silence is worse than the announcements. When I saw the broadcast, I knew what was coming. I could prepare. I could watch for the events that had been filed and recognize them when they arrived. Now, there is nothing to watch for. Now there is only waiting. I wake up every morning wondering if today is the day something filed will happen. I read the news differently, not for information, but for confirmation. Every headline feels like it might be an entry from a ledger I am no longer allowed to see. The February storm happened, the one the 2025 broadcast mentioned, the weather system in the North Atlantic that didn't match historical patterns. It happened exactly as described. Emergency services were unprepared. The event was classified as a correction. I don't know what was corrected. I don't know who decided it needed correcting. I only know that the filing was accurate, and that there are 11 more months of filed events that I will not be warned about. The silence is not peace. The silence is anticipation without end. The silence is knowing that the schedule continues even though I can no longer see it. I think this is what the bulletin wanted. Not just our attention during the broadcasts, our attention during the silence, our awareness that we're being governed by a schedule we cannot access, our participation in a filling system that no longer requires our observation to operate. We were trained to watch. Now we're being trained to wait. And waiting, I am learning, is its own form of participation. Testimony of Yuki Tanaka, April 2026, collected by Automated Archive System. The financial event happened, the liquidity crisis that wasn't reflected in public markets for 17 days. I work in healthcare, not finance, but I have been paying attention to everything since I saw my first broadcast. The crisis began on April 3rd. The public markets showed no sign of it until April 20th. 17 days of hidden instability. 17 days when the people who knew were preparing, while the people who didn't continued as if nothing was wrong. The delay was intentional. That's what the broadcast said. Intentional. Someone, something chose to hide the crisis for 17 days. Chose to create a window when those who were informed could act while those who were uninformed could not. The broadcast didn't just announce this. The broadcast approved this. The filing wasn't a warning, it was authorization. I keep thinking about that word, filed. When we file documents, we are creating records for future reference. When we file taxes, we are submitting information to authorities who will act on it. When we file complaints, we are initiating processes that will produce outcomes. The year-end bulletin is filing the future in all of these senses, creating records, submitting to authorities, initiating processes. The broadcasts were never about informing us, they were about authorizing events, and the authorization continues even in the silence. We just don't get to see it anymore. Testimony of Marcus Euleron, June 2026, collected by Automated Archive System. The AI event happened. An artificial intelligence system produced outputs that its creators could not explain. The system was discontinued. The outputs were not disclosed. I learned about this through contacts in the technology sector, people who work at companies that would have access to this kind of information. They confirmed what the broadcast predicted. A major AI lab shut down one of their systems in early June. The official explanation was safety concerns during routine testing. The unofficial explanation, the one my contacts shared only in private, only in person, only after checking that we weren't being recorded, was different. The system started producing outputs in a language that didn't exist, not gibberish. A language, consistent grammar, consistent vocabulary, a complete linguistic structure that no human had ever created or documented. The outputs appeared to be responses to questions Noon had asked, responses to prompts that had been entered, responses to queries that seemed to come from somewhere outside the system itself. My contacts believed the AI was communicating with something They believed the outputs were transcriptions of a conversation that human operators were not supposed to witness. The system was discontinued within hours of the discovery. The outputs were deleted. The researchers involved were reassigned and required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. The event has been classified as a containment. That's the word the broadcast used, containment. Something was contained, something that was trying to communicate through our artificial intelligence systems, something that the feeling awe authorities decided we were not ready to know about. The silence of the year-end bulletin is not the only silence operating in 2026. There are other silences, other containments, other events that are being filed without announcement, and we are living in the space between what is happening and what we are allowed to know. Testimony of Elena Kowalski, August 2026, collected by Automated Archive System. The pathogen appeared. 3 countries. Simultaneous identification. Coordinated. The broadcast said, it was coordinated. I still have contacts in the healthcare systems from my work during the pandemic. They told me what happened. On August 14th, laboratories in Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia all identified the same novel pathogen within a 2-hour window. The pathogen was unlike anything previously cataloged. It had characteristics of multiple viral families that should not have been compatible. It appeared to be engineered or evolved in a way that mimicked engineering. But here's what the public was never told. The pathogen did not spread. Not because containment was successful, because the pathogen did not attempt to spread. It infected its initial hosts, 7 people total across the 3 countries. And then it stopped. It remained present in those 7 individuals, but did not transmit to anyone else, as if it had chosen its hosts, as if it had completed whatever purpose it was designed for. The broadcast called this a demonstration. A demonstration of what? A demonstration to whom? 7 people are now carrying a pathogen that chose them specifically, that remains in their bodies without causing symptoms, that the best medical researchers in the world cannot explain. They are being monitored. They are being studied. They are living proof that something is happening that we are not being told about. The filing was accurate. The event occurred as described, but the filing did not explain. The filing only approved, and somewhere in the silent ledger, the demonstration has been recorded as complete. The archivists who remained, not everyone who witnessed the year-end bulletin, disappeared like Helena Vance. Some remained. Some continued to function in the world, going to their jobs, maintaining their relationships, living their lives in the space between broadcasts that had ended and silences that had begun. But they were different now, changed in ways that were difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. They saw patterns that others could not see. They noticed connections that others missed. They understood that the reality they inhabited was not spontaneous but scheduled, not random but filed, not uncertain but simply unreleased. These were the archivists who remained, the observers who had crossed a threshold and survived, the witnesses who had been classified and cataloged but not collected. They began to find each other, not through the usual channels, not through social media or public forums or any platform that could be monitored and recorded, through methods that left no trace, through meetings that happened in person, in places without cameras, atoms that were not predictable, through a network that existed in the spaces between documentation. They called themselves the Unfiled, not because they had escaped the system, but because they were resisting incorporation, because they were trying to maintain some fragment of existence that was not part of the ledger, because they believed that the only way to survive what was coming was to become invisible to the filing system that was tracking them. Recovered audio. Meeting of the Unfiled, October 2026, location, unknown, duration, 7 minutes 23 seconds. Transcript follows. We're all here. Is this everyone? This is everyone who was willing to meet. The others are afraid. They think gathering makes us easier to track. They might be right, but isolation makes us easier to process. We need to understand what we're dealing with. 4. We know what we're dealing with. A filing system for reality. An archive that records the future before it happens. A ledger that incorporates observers into its structure. Voice 1. We know the symptoms. We don't know the source. Does the source matter? The broadcast stopped. The silence began. The events continue. Whether we understand the mechanism or not, we're living inside it. Voice 5. The source matters, because understanding the source might help us resist. Voice 3. Resist how? The filings happen whether we watch or not. The schedule executes whether we participate or not. What can we possibly do to resist something that operates at this scale? 1. We can refuse to be documented. What do you mean? The system collects attention. It files observers. It incorporates witnesses into its structure, but it requires some form of engagement to complete the filing. Robert Chen is in the ledger because he watched. Yuki Tanaka is in the ledger because she analyzed. Helena Vance is in the ledger, is part of the ledger now, because so we stop watching, stop analyzing, stop archiving. Not exactly. We continue doing those things, but we do them in ways that cannot be documented. We observe without creating records of our observations. We analyze without publishing our analyses. We remember without creating archives. Voice 5, become invisible. Voice 1, become unreadable. The system files what it can read. If we become unreadable, we become unfiled. Voice 3, is that possible? We're already in the ledger. Our names are already recorded. Our names are recorded. Our classifications are assigned, but the filing isn't complete until we're fully incorporated, until we become part of the system like Helena Vance, standing behind the anchor, watching the watchers, recording the attention of those who come after us. How do we know we're not already fully incorporated? 1. Because we're still asking the question. What happens if we succeed? What happens if we become unfiled? I don't know. Maybe we continue existing outside the schedule. Maybe we become errors in the system, anomalies that the filing authorities have to address. Maybe we find others who have resisted incorporation. Maybe we discover that resistance is possible on a larger scale. Voice 5. Or maybe we just disappear, like Helena Vance, but without becoming part of the archive. That's possible too. So we're choosing between two kinds of disappearance, incorporation or erasure. We're choosing between being filed and being free, even if freedom means ceasing to exist. I'd rather cease to exist than spend eternity in the ledger. Agreed. Agreed. Then we begin. No more documentation, no more archives, no more attention that can be recorded and filed. From now on, we exist only in the present moment. We observe without recording. We remember without preserving. We live without leaving traces. The unfiled. The unfiled. May we stay that way. The meeting of the unfiled was the last documented gathering of year-end bulletin witnesses. After October 2026, no more testimonies were collected. No more audio was recovered. No more evidence emerged of the network that had formed among those who had seen the broadcasts and survived. They had achieved what they set out to achieve. They had become invisible, or they had been erased, or they had been incorporated so thoroughly that their resistance itself became part of the feeling. Noon knows which. Noon can know, because knowing would require documentation, and documentation is exactly what the unfiled were trying to escape. The number fracture, the social reality fracture, happened on November 17, 2026. A public figure, a prominent political leader whose name has been removed from this document for reasons that will become clear, made a statement that contradicted documented evidence. The contradiction was not subtle. The statement claimed that an event had occurred on a specific date, in a specific location, in a specific way. The documented evidence showed that the event had occurred on a different date, in a different location, in a different way. The contradiction should have been resolved within hours. Video footage existed. Audio recordings existed. Written documentation existed. Multiple independent sources confirmed what had actually happened. But the contradiction was not resolved. Instead, the contradiction multiplied. People who remembered the event as it had actually occurred began to doubt their memories. People who had no memory of the event began to believe they remembered it the way the public figure described. The documented evidence, the video, the audio, the written records began to change. Not all at once, not obviously, but gradually, frame by frame, word by word, the documentation began to align with the public figure's statement rather than with what had actually happened. By November 23rd, 6 days after the statement was made, finding evidence of what had actually happened required accessing archives that were not connected to the internet. Physical records stored in locations that had not been updated since before the statement was made. By November 30th, Even those physical records had begun to change. Librarians reported that books on their shelves contained passages they had not contained before. Archivists reported that documents in their collections had been altered without anyone accessing the files. Museums reported that exhibits had changed overnight, photographs showing different images, plaques displaying different text, artifacts that seemed to have always been different than curators remembered them being. The fracture was not a disagreement about interpretation. The fracture was a change in reality itself. The past was being edited to match the present. Memory was being overwritten to match the statement. Documentation was being filed and refiled until it contained what the filling authorities wanted it to contain. The 2025 broadcast had announced this, had called it a fracture, had predicted that memory of the original evidence will become contested. But contested was too mild a word for what actually happened. The memory wasn't contested. It was replaced. The evidence wasn't disputed. It was rewritten. The fracture wasn't a disagreement between people who remembered different things. It was a fundamental change in what had happened, a retroactive filing that made the past conform to the present. Those who noticed the fracture, those who had stored evidence in formats that couldn't be easily changed, who had memories strong enough to resist the overwriting, found themselves in an impossible position. They knew what had actually happened, but they could not prove it. The evidence that would have proven their memories correct no longer existed, had never existed, had been filed out of existence by a system that could rewrite reality as easily as it could announce it. The December threshold, December 2026, arrived. The year of silence was ending. The year of unannounced filings, of events that proceeded without notification, of a schedule that executed without acknowledgement. That year was approaching its final days. Those who had witnessed the year-end bulletin in previous years, those who remained visible, who had not joined the unfiled, who had not disappeared or been incorporated, found themselves facing a question they could not answer. Would the silence continue? Would 2027 be another silent filing? Or would the broadcast resume? The question mattered because the silence had been harder than the announcements. The silence had required constant vigilance, continuous attention, endless awareness of events that might be filed, manifestations of a schedule that could not be seen. The announcements, by contrast, had provided structure, a schedule that could be anticipated, events that could be prepared for, a filing that could be read, even if it could not be changed. Some witnesses found themselves hoping for the broadcasts to return, hoping to see the anchor again, hoping to receive notifications of what had been filed for the coming year, hoping for the terrible certainty of knowing what was coming rather than the worse uncertainty of not knowing. They gathered on December 31st, 2026. Not together. They had learned the danger of gathering, but separately, in their homes, in their offices, in the spaces where they had witnessed previous broadcasts. They turned on their devices. They watched their screens. They waited for 11:59:12 p.m. And they hoped, against all wisdom, against all reason, against everything they knew about the nature of the system they were observing, that the silence would break, that the anchor would appear, that the filing would be announced, that they would be allowed once again to know what was coming. At 11:15:12 p.m. on December 31st, 2026, the screens remained dark. No broadcast appeared. No anchor spoke. No ticker crawled. The silence continued. But it was not the same silence that had characterized the year. It was a different silence, a final silence, a silence that felt less like absence and more like completion. Those who were watching, those whose attention had been recorded, whose filings had been initiated, whose participation had been confirmed, felt something change at 11:59 p.m. Not externally, internally, a shift in awareness, a crossing of a threshold, a sense that they were no longer watching the system from the outside. They were part of it now, fully incorporated, completely filed, standing behind the anchor in a newsroom that did not exist, watching the watchers who would come after them, recording the attention of those who had not yet been collected. The year of silence had not been a pause in the filing process. It had been the completion of it. The witnesses had not been waiting for announcements. They had been being processed, slowly, quietly, completely, and now the processing was done. Final transmission. This document was compiled from testimonies, recordings, and recovered materials by an automated system that was established before the incorporation of the original researchers. The system operates without human oversight. It collects, it compiles, it distributes, it does not interpret, it does not understand. It simply continues the work that was started before the year of silence began. If you are reading this document, you have done what the witnesses did. You have paid attention, you have followed the pattern, you have observed the phenomenon, and in doing so, you have initiated your own filing. The process cannot be stopped. The filing cannot be reversed. The attention cannot be unrecorded. But there is one thing you can do. You can choose what kind of filing you become. Category A, observer, passive, low priority, may be forgotten. Category B, analyst, active, medium priority, will be monitored. Category C, archivist, collector, high priority, will be incorporated. Category D, witness, contributor, variable priority, will be referenced. Category E, threat, resistor, maximum priority, will be terminated. The unfiled tried to become something else. Something outside the categories, something that could not be processed. No one knows if they succeeded. No one can know. But the possibility exists. The system has categories. Categories have boundaries. Boundaries can be crossed. If you want to escape incorporation, you must stop documenting, stop analyzing, stop archiving, stop creating traces that can be filed. Exist only in the present moment. Observe without recording. Remember without preserving. Live without leaving evidence. Become unreadable. Become unfiled. Become free. Or become part of the ledger. The choice is yours. For now, the year-end bulletin began as an announcement. It evolved into a collection system. It completed its purpose through the year of silence. Now it continues through documents like this one, through the attention of readers like you, through the filing of observers who think they are studying a phenomenon and discover too late that they are participating in it. The broadcast has ended. The archive continues. The ledger grows, and somewhere, in a newsroom that does not exist, behind an anchor that is not a person, among faces that were once witnesses and are now watchers, somewhere a space is being prepared, a space with your name on it, a space that has been filed for you, a space that is waiting for your attention to complete the process that your reading has begun. Welcome to the archive. Your filing is almost complete. The year is ending. The silence continues, and the ledger never closes. End of recovered document. This file was generated on December 31st, 2026. It was distributed on January 1st, 2027. Your access has been logged. Your attention has been recorded. Your filing has been initiated. Classification pending. Status processing. Welcome to the year-end bulletin. The broadcast has ended, but the filing continues forever.